Greetings. Welcome to Homebrew Highlights, a little show where I take a look at homemade content for Dungeons & Dragons. My name is Nathan, and for the last 25 years online, I've gone by the name of the Amethyst Dragon. For the last 30 years or so, I have been a player and dungeon master. I've made a lot of homebrew content over the years, and that pace has only picked up when I made the transition to 5th edition. I make way too much stuff to go into my 2 weekly homebrew home campaigns, and so I share it online. Today, I'm going to be talking about a dozen subclasses that are all related to dragons that I've made for the game. I'll be taking a look at a homebrew creation by someone else. They go by the name of DeckofJokersGames, and I'll be grabbing a couple of Halloween-related things from my grand list of homebrews. Let's just take right off. I'm going to dive into these subclasses, kind of alphabetical. And the reason I did these in the first place is with the Fizban's Treasury of Dragons book that has just come out. In anticipation of that, people were talking about what would be in it and what monsters and races and magic items and subclasses would be in it, and everybody was rather disappointed to find 2 in the whole book. So I already had a dragon warlock, so I took it upon myself to make another 11 subclasses so that every base class would have something dragon related that they could have fun with. So I'm going to start with Artificers. First is the Dragonforger. This is the first Artificer subclass I have made, because I don't actually use them in my games. They're relatively new, and don't quite know where they would fit in my world yet. And also, usually I only make things for classes that are found in the system reference document or the player's handbook, so that people don't have to buy additional books to use the content that I make. But with the Artificer, I made the Dragonforger. These are people who really like dragons and what they can do, but don't have dragon blood themselves or dragon magic themselves. So they create magical devices that replicate the powers of dragons. These guys they create a special harness that they can wear, and then everything they make, they attach to it so they can use its magic. They can do things like make special gauntlets that can conjure up claws that they can cut things with, a tail that attaches to the harness that they can whip things with, a helmet that has big jaws they can bite with it. Later on, they can add modules that let them do dragon fear or dragon breath, and one of the highest level things is they can attach wings to their harness. And then, because having all this stuff is kind of cumbersome, I followed in the steps of Iron Man and Star-Lord from the MCU, and when they're not in use, the Dragonforge items can disappear into their own pocket dimension to be called out when they're needed. I thought that was just kind of a fun little touch. That way they don't have to haul everything with them all the time. For Barbarians, I created something called the Path of the Scaletaker. These are characters that have either heard tales of the devastating power and evil of dragons, or they are survivors of when a dragon destroyed their village and killed their family, and they just absolutely hate dragons. And this builds into their rage mechanic. When they are raging, they gain resistance to that type of dragon's breath weapon, immunity to dragon fear, and at their highest level, at their most skilled, when their hatred just peaks, they can actually get advantage on every single attack roll that they make against dragons. Very single-minded, very focused on the destruction of dragonkind, because, they've seen several of them, so they must all be evil and need to be destroyed. Then on the opposite side of that, we have bards, and they get what I call the College of Dragonsong. They've heard stories about noble dragons and dragons of power and wisdom and benevolence, and they think dragons are just incredibly inspiring, and so they share stories and poems to give inspiration to people. Maybe artwork is how they give inspiration to their party members. they actually get a special form of the Find Familiar spell that calls a tiny chromatic or metallic dragon. And then this dragon can travel with them. They can make it disappear just like a regular familiar, but it's just this dragon. They can communicate with it. They can send it out to attack, kind of like the Pact of the Chain Warlocks, but these dragons aren't very tough. They're more of a companion and aid. You use them for exploration or just somebody to sing along with them. And then at higher levels, their dragon actually gets its own pool of inspiration dice, which they can give to whoever the dragon wants to. So that is the College of Dragonsong. Because, hey, if you like dragons, maybe you want one with you all the time. For clerics, what I usually do with domains is make them very thematically focused and not deity focused. So darkness, light, protection, travel, madness, combat, or battle. But for the dragon domain for clerics, I decided to dedicate it to two deities. We've got Bahamut, or Bahamut, however you pronounce it. I'm going to go with Bahamut, and Tiamat. And the features change depending on which deity you follow. Clerics of Bahamut are big into protection of others. So they get like the protection fighting style. They get features that protect others, especially those who are weaker than the cleric. On the other side, you've got the Tiamat clerics, who are all about causing damage with fire and ice and acid and the different elements that are based on the breath. So, something unusual for me to dedicate a domain to a specific deity. Especially deities that I don't use those in my world. My own world has its own set of 20 deities, and the published ones are not in them. But I know a lot of games use these two dragon deities, so I made the dragon domain for them. For druids, I made the Circle of the Wyrms. And these guys, them, when they take the subclass, they pick a path, either chromatic or metallic, or a grouping of dragons. And then each day they get to pick one type of dragon out of their chosen group. For the day, that type of dragon boosts what they can do. For instance, when they turn into a beast with wild shape, their animal's bite attack inflicts additional damage based on the breath weapon of the dragon they chose. Later on, they get to release a dragon's roar to scare their enemies. Eventually, they get to use their wild shape to turn into a wormling dragon. And the type or color depends on whatever they chose for the day. At their highest level, their most powerful ability is to turn into an adult dragon of that type. Yeah. Spellcasting druidic dragon. Sounds like fun to me. For fighters, I went and kind of took the path kind of like paladins do. So I created the Dragon of the Word. And these are fighters that have given their word to a dragon or a group of dragons to serve them, to protect them, to complete a long-term quest. They've given their word to do something. And these are really inspired by a couple of fictional characters. In 1996's Dragonheart, Bowen, the knight, gave his word to serve the dragon Draco in return for saving the life of a prince. And in Avatar: The Last Airbender, you've got Uncle Iroh, who had a title of the Dragon of the West. He was a famous warrior, but he had given his word to protect the existence of the last dragons in the world. So, Dragon of the Word, based on giving one's word and getting a little something in return. For monks, yeah, they get a subclass in Fizban, but I made up my own before the book came out, so I'm going with this one. Because monks are based on kind of stories of East Asian fighting monks, I wanted to base their dragon subclass on an East Asian style dragon. So this is the Way of the Tian Lung. The Tian Lung is the D&D version of the Tian Long, the Heavenly Dragon. These are dragons that involve themselves with elements and weather and tradition and order. And so I gave these monks spellcasting like Eldritch Knights. They have spell slots and grouping of spells that have to do with the elements, with the weather, with keeping order. Save their key points for monk stuff. Eventually they can swim because the Tianlong has a lot to do with rivers and oceans and seas. And at their highest level, they can control the skies. They can control the weather or call something down a little more destructive if they need to. They do get a breath weapon, a combination of fire and light. And that is the way of the Tianlong. Going over to Paladins, I have the Oath of the Wyrmsworn. This one is pretty much what you kind of expect. They swear an oath to a specific dragon, and in return they get things like damage resistance, fire breath. When they channel divinity, they can add damage to their attacks. They can release an aura of awe or fear. And of course, at their highest level, when they get their big transformation that all paladins do, they grow wings, they grow scales, they get stronger, and they can fly into battle. That is the Oath of the Wyrmsworn. Kind of an overlap with the Dragon of the Word, but definitely paladin related. For Rangers, my version is called the Dragonblooded, and these are characters that sometime in their past or recent ancestors' past, they found a way to mingle dragon blood with their own and form a connection to that magic. So these characters, every night they dream about dragons, fighting them, hanging out with them, being a dragon. And then when they wake up, you basically roll a dice to determine what type of dragon they dreamt about. And for the rest of that day, they get features based on that dragon. Their weapon attacks can do extra elemental bit damage depending on the dragon's breath weapon. They can get damage resistance. They can use a breath weapon. And then at later levels, they can take actual dragon's blood and find a way to mingle it with their own blood again, either drinking it or injecting it or just smearing it all over their hands so it soaks into their skin. In doing that, they get a couple of things. They can change the type of dragon they're linked with for the day to whatever type of dragon blood they actually used. And because they are actually expending this dragon blood, they don't get it back, and it's a rare resource. I give them a big chunk of temporary hit points to help them survive a battle, almost treating it like healing at the same time, but definitely involved with the blood part of dragons. For rogues, I did something fun. I call this one the Hoard Finder. So these characters have heard tales of the amazing wealth and treasure and magic of dragons, or they've actually seen a dragon's hoard in person, and something clicked in their brain and connected with that, and connected, well, because things are magical, they are attuned to treasure, and they have this desire to build their own treasure hoard. Because, I mean, dragons get it, why shouldn't they? So they get, skills to help them find and acquire treasure. They can sense concentrations of wealth. Just like paladins can sense, otherworldly creatures, these rogues can take the time to sense large amounts of wealth nearby. And then they get bonuses to their skills when those skill checks are made specifically to acquire that wealth. So bonuses to stealth and open locks and stuff like that when they need it to get wealth. Because loot comes in more forms than just money or gems. There's art objects, there's tapestries, there's rugs, there's furniture sometimes. They can create their own personal portable hole to haul all of this loot in. Just a little something, because this stuff doesn't fit in a backpack. And in reality, a bag of holding should be like a giant duffel bag, and that's just not stealthy or roguelike. At their highest level, when they've built a treasure hoard in a physical location, not in a portable hole, they can arrange it in a certain way to create their own semi-permanent teleportation circle. They're the only ones that know about it, unless they show a wizard, their wizard buddy, this circle. And then once a day, when they need to escape someplace or return with something more to add to their hoard, or they just miss their money, they can teleport to their hoard. So it sounded like fun. somebody who's focused not on what the dragon does, but on what the dragon collects. For Warlocks, I have the dragon. You know, people have been asking for this for years from Wizards of the Coast, while, you know, myself and probably, you know, 50, 100 other people have made our own version of the Dragon Warlock Patron. Mine is kind of generic. Basically, it works for any of the standard dragons, metallic or chromatic. Whichever dragon you are serving, the features are geared toward that type of dragon. Damage resistance, breath weapon, you know, several other features depending on that color. You don't have to wait for Wizards of the Coast to make things for you. That's what homebrewing is about. And last but not least, for Wizards, I have the School of Dragonspeakers. For this one, I went with the idea that dragons were the original spellcasters, the original practitioners of magic, and what they discovered they eventually started to share with others. That's why all this magical stuff is always written in Draconic, right? So, these wizards delve into the old writings. They go to ancient sites of magic and read, find out these secrets. They risk their lives to go speak with dragons in person. And in return, they learn little things that help improve their magic. The main thing they get is something called the Voice of the Dragon. A few times a day, they can use a more powerful version of the verbal components of a spell. And in doing so, they increase the spell save DC of their spells, make them harder to resist. They can only do this a few times. It is based on their proficiency bonus and safely. And then they can push themselves to do it one more time beyond that. But if they do, they lose their voice for 24 hours. So they can't cast spells with verbal components. They can only whisper. Some magic items they wouldn't be able to use if they have to use a command word. And yeah, this lasts until 24 hours pass, so it's not even just a long rest. You can have a cleric cast like Heal or Greater Restoration specifically to restore their voice. But other than that, that is a sacrifice that they make for that extra boost in power. 6th level, they start to be able to use their knowledge of dragons to better resist their fear, their breath weapons. And then at higher levels, when they use the Voice of the Dragon, it not only increases the spell save DC, it actually makes it harder to interrupt or break that wizard's spells. They get this at 14th level. So whatever spell they cast using the Voice of the Dragon counts as their highest level possible that they can cast. 7th level, 8th level, 9th level, depending on their level. But only for purposes of counterspell and dispel magic. So, say you're using the Voice of the Dragon to cast your 3rd level fireball and somebody tries to counterspell it. Well, it's going to be more difficult because that fireball is considered a 7th level spell. It doesn't use a 7th level spell slot. It doesn't do the extra damage of using a higher spell slot, but it is harder to counterspell or to dispel their charms or other spells. So, dispel magic and counterspell, weaker against the spells of the School of Dragonspeakers. Well, that's it for my dozen subclasses. I did not make one for sorcerers. They've had one since the beginning of 5th edition. I didn't think they needed it, so I made ones for the classes that don't already have them in the player's handbook or the SRD. Now, other dragon stuff, I went online. I was looking to see other things that people had made, things that catch my interest. A lot of subclasses out there, but I wanted to look for something different because I was already doing those. I came across something called the Galekite. This is a monster created by a user that goes by the name of DeckofJokersGames. And it is a smaller creature. It's medium-sized, kind of like a wyvern. It doesn't have front legs, but it's got wings, white, blue, and black scales. It has a breath weapon. It has strong wind that knocks things down. And they are predatory. These things are only a challenge rating of 3 individually. They're not that tough, so they could make a good encounter for a low-level character, or low-level group. But these things sometimes live in larger colonies. And one of the coolest things that DeckofJokersGames did is when there's at least 3 of them actually nesting together in a location for a good amount of time, their bit of dragon magic begins to affect the weather. The region around their nest has unpredictable wind patterns, random storms. When people or other creatures approach too close, dark storm clouds begin to gather around the nesting area, kind of as a warning to whoever's approaching, but also to the Galekites that something either dangerous or edible is nearby. And when there's at least 3 of them, and this happens, they get layer actions as a group. Any of them can make that layer action, any of the individual ones, but they can call down a bolt of lightning, like it's called lightning spell. They can have strong winds to knock things down. They can call in extra wind and water to obscure the area. So it's a cool additional mechanic of a layer action for lower level creatures. These guys are a challenge rating of 3, which is awesome. And DeckofJokersGames put in the thought to describe how sailors would avoid known nesting areas, both because of the danger and because of the difficulty with sailing in unpredictable wind. Talked about the rocky coastlines where they build their nests, or tall rocky islands, so they can get a view out over the sea where they go hunting. So this is a cool creature. I am going to be using it in my own games, and for that, thank you, DeckofJokersGames, for the Galekite. Now, unrelated to dragon stuff, but related to Halloween, which is very soon, I'm going to delve back into my list of homebrews for things I've made. I'm going to start with a joke. What do you call a decapitated centaur? It's a headless horseman. Well, it's a lame dad joke, but being a dad and a homebrewer, I decided to do something with it. So the headless horseman is an undead headless centaur. Has been cursed to wield a scythe and go out on the roads at night and collect the heads of unwary travelers. Only comes out at night, generally during autumn, because that fits the theme. This is a very dangerous creature. I put him at a challenge rating of 10. He's got a lot of hit points. He wields a scythe with like a 10-foot reach. Does a lot of hit and run. He can charge in, doing extra damage because he charges on his attack, and then he can leave without getting attacks of opportunity on him as a special feature. And what's worse for many characters is if he manages to reduce you to 0 hit points, he takes your head, cuts it off, it vanishes and teleports into his saddlebag. He's got saddlebags all across his back, and you are dead. No death saves. You're just dead. You don't have a head. And then he'll either try to collect more heads or leave. But he has been cursed by some entity to collect heads. And then when the sun rises, those heads vanish. Magically transported to whatever creature has cursed the centaur. The real problem with that is, without a head, Revivify doesn't work. Speak with Dead doesn't work, but mostly Revivify. So you need more. You either need to get that head back before it vanishes at sunrise, or use more powerful magic to bring that dead person back. So, yeah, definitely a challenge. And kind of a tragic figure, because he doesn't want to cut people's heads off. He's been cursed to do it. His only real relief is when he's killed. But then he comes back in a week. Cursed to continue doing it. So that might be a quest line for player characters, is one, learning about this guy, and 2, finding a way to put him to rest for good. Because he'd like that, actually. And then, now, also Halloween related, I came up with a mask. I call this the Mask of the Wolfman, named after a couple of movies that I've seen over the years. And it's a wolf-like mask. You put it on, and because it's magical, you can transform into a wolf or into a hybrid form of a werewolf, but under your complete control. So you're not just becoming a ravenous, bloodthirsty monster, which is pretty cool the first few times you use it. the mask is cursed, and if you use it too much, you actually turn into an evil werewolf. And then it takes 2 remove curse to get rid of it, because you got to get rid of the mask with 1, and then the curse of lycanthropy after that. I thought it was fun. Like an actual curse of the Wolfman. It's a mask. Well, that pretty much takes care of all the homebrew I'm going to cover. This video has been longer than most will be in this series. I don't usually plan on having a whole dozen homebrews featured, all with the same theme like I did the subclasses. They might be related in the future, they might not, but there won't be that many to start out the video. If you like content like this video, go ahead, click the like button, subscribe to my channel, hit the little notification bell button if you want to be notified when I upload something new. And if you really like the content and you want all the hundreds of things that I've made, go ahead and look into joining my Patreon as a patron of the D&D arts. Very affordable, just a few dollars a month if you like that sort of thing. But I appreciate that. But really, just thanks for stopping in. Thanks for watching, listening. I'm off to make more homebrew. Take care.